Hello everybody, this is Kai Marin, and today we're going to be talking about how leftists are attacking Stardew Valley and all cozy games. Now I know what you're probably thinking, how can they be attacking Stardew Valley? This is literally like the most unproblematic game you could possibly make. It's a game where you farm. Okay, what could be the problem here? Alright, but you know how leftists are. They find a problem with literally everything, and actually, while on the surface this is just leftists being insane, I do think there are some very sort of interesting kind of masks slipped. I do think it shows something very interesting about the leftist psyche. Alright, but anyway, let's just get into it. So this is a tweet from Master of the TDS. 2 days ago, Tristan J. Tarwater of Sweet Baby Inc. gave a talk called Decolonizing Cozy Games. Here's what Sweet Baby Inc. people are teaching about cozy games. Farming, families, even the Four Seasons are framed as colonial baggage. One slide literally says there are so many white people. And the fix they point to is Tales of the Shire, a game Sweet Baby Inc. themselves worked on. You cannot make this stuff up. So let's go into this. So decolonization and decoloniality. Decolonization often framed as an undoing of colonial influences and structures. It is also a creative process of imagining what cultures would look like if not disrupted by the exploitation of colonialism. And then the process/practice of rejecting Eurocentric ways of knowing and being. Coined by Annabelle Quijano, this concept acknowledges how different concepts of the cosmos influence knowledge acquisition, information storage, and transfer, and ideas of the self. Now, I want to start just by talking about this. And the whole thing is that this is just a fact, but not all cultures are created equal. And one thing you can see from this is that the Eurocentric ways of knowing and being are just the best ways of knowing and being. That's one of the reasons why Europe took over the entire world. Like, where the hell? Yeah, that's why Europe managed to take over the entire frickin' world. Because, you know, Eurocentric ways of doing things are just simply the best. Alright? As you can see, map of all the countries that were colonized. And basically everywhere except Japan, Korea, Thailand. And I wouldn't even really count Liberia because that was a frickin', you know, white-funded colony, but... And look, it can go even further, alright? And like I said, now you see, say, and it goes the other side too, because, you know, the East Asia is also, they also have their own very efficient ways of doing things, which is why, you know, Japan industrialized so fast and built such a big empire, which is why China is starting to take over the world through trade, surpassing America. And the whole thing, one of the reasons, like, let's focus on just the Eurocentric ways of doing things now, and it's like, the whole thing is that they reject things so basic. Like they say here, knowledge acquisition, information storage, and transfer. Knowledge acquisition. Like, what do you mean by that? Like, they reject the scientific method? Honestly, they probably would. They probably would say that the scientific method is bullshit or whatever, because it hurts their fifis, because their ancestors who were fucking, because their ancestors who were still chucking spears at each other when Europeans were, you know, exploring the entire world, never came up with it. Or even something like information storage. Like, what the hell do you mean by that? What did Europeans do? They wrote books? That's kind of how you store information. And by the way, Europeans didn't even invent books. Alright? But you want to know who didn't invent books? Africans. Alright? Or even say, this is another example, India. Okay, India had writing, but they never really recorded their history very well. Alright? It's actually kind of an interesting part. A lot of India's history has been reconstructed after the fact by, you know, European archaeologists using, or, you know, just using European methods. Because the Indians never did a good job themselves. But anyways, though, so I'm kind of rambling here. This is a very, you know, this is a very complex topic. It's hard to do this all unscripted. But anyways, colonialism and cozy games, where? So start off, so many white people. Yeah, there's too many white people. Oh my god. Yeah, okay. And then the outside individual who say, I'm not even sure if this is true. Well, look, for these people, even like 50% white is too white. You know, that's how insane they are. But anyways, though, because most cozy games are like indie, all right, and indie games are usually pretty woke, or at least left leaning. But anyways, the outside individual who saves the day. All right, and then the land is there for the taking because somehow, somehow going somewhere, legally acquiring a piece of land that's unused and turning it into something that's problematic somehow. That's colonialism. This is the whole thing. Like, these people like shit on colonialism, or they bring this up about how like America's a nation of immigrants. That's not really true at all. All right, America's a nation of settlers, because when the Europeans came to America initially, there was literally nothing here. All right, like literally nothing was here. All right, and they built from nothing, one of the strongest country that ever exists. Okay, that's what America became, built from nothing. And look, I could get into it, honestly. I could talk all about colonialism because they shit on the Americans. The Americans actually, the settlers actually did acquire a lot of America legally, but we could talk about that another time. Corn and wheat make number go up. And, that's just shitting on capitalism, nuclear family, two-gen family. So, leftists have been shitting on, the nuclear family for years. It's problematic to, have a wife and kids, for some reason. And even the two-gen family, okay? If you want to do, like, the Italian thing and stay with your parents for a while, I mean, that's problematic too now, apparently. And then monochronic structures, 4 seasons, Gregorian calendar. This is honestly pretty unhinged, but we're going to dive into that later. Conveniently ancient civilizations. Like I said, we don't have the full talk, so we can only speculate. But I mean, this is just kind of true. I mean, ancient civilizations exist in real life. All right. I mean, how's that problematic? And I mean, is it really such a bad thing to work that into your game somehow? Like here's an example. When I went to Japan, you can still find some like ancient ruins. Like I went to Nara, and they still have remnants of like the old palace there that was around in like the 7th century or something. All right, it's actually pretty interesting. But anyways, though, and then spirituality is silly. I don't really know what they're talking about there. And then just straight up racism. I have no idea what they're talking about. I mean, the whole thing, like I said, most of these cozy games are like indie, right? So I don't even really know what they're even, how problematic they could actually be. But, this is how leftists are. Literally the smallest infraction makes them go off. But I want to talk about this one. Monochronic structures, 4 seasons, Gregorian calendar. So first off, Gregorian calendar. All right, I hate Catholics, but even I love the Gregorian calendar. We should keep it around. CE and BCE is bullshit. Keep it AD and BC. All right. But anyways, and then there's 4 seasons and monochronic structure. Now, this shit just seems unhinged, but I want to dive into it because this is something I actually sort of always knew. I just never knew the name of it. So monochronic structures describe a cultural or organizational approach to time where tasks are handled one at a time in a linear sequential manner, emphasizing schedules, punctuality, and task completion over simultaneous activities or relationship building. All right, and then you can compare that to polychronic structures, which is performing elements of different tasks concurrently as opposed to sequentially. Polychronic cultures tend to do many things simultaneously, so it's basically a culture built on multitasking. And keep in mind, by the way, humans literally cannot multitask efficiently. What is commonly perceived as multitasking is actually rapid task switching, which divides attention and leads to a switch cost. So, and this is sort of what I meant when I said not all cultures are created equal, okay? Because you look at, say, here's a map of monochronic versus polychronic cultures, and all the countries that are wealthier are all monochronic. All the countries that are broke are polychronic. All right. Interesting, don't you think? Like I said, look at this map here. Same story. Although I actually do kind of disagree with this map because I'd say it definitely exists on more of a spectrum. Like Italy, for example, northern Italy I would say is more monochronic versus southern Italy, which is going to be more polychronic, but they just kind of make it red, right? But I'd say it exists kind of on a spectrum. But look, the point still stands. And this ties into the 4 seasons thing. Because one thing you have to keep in mind, this is kind of easy to forget about, but not the entire world doesn't actually have 4 seasons. In fact, most of it doesn't. Africa, India, Southeast Asia, they don't really have 4 seasons. In those cases, it's more like a wet season and then a dry season. And this kind of ties back into the monochronic versus polychronic structure things, because, in Europe or, the Far East, you have to actually, where, there is a winter, you actually do need to plan for that winter. All right? Because in say Africa might be a lot more dangerous, but simultaneously, it's a land of plenty. As long as you can survive, the dangerous animals, you don't really need to think super long term or very strategically, But in Europe, it's a lot different. You gotta always be preparing for the winter, because there's gonna be a massive part of the year, a massive stretch of time where food is going to be very scarce. All right? And it's the same thing in the Far East. So these different environments led to, these people evolving in different ways. And I mean, look, in Eastern Europe, I'd say this is more just because of communism. But anyways, though, this sort of led to, humans, developing culturally, genetically in different ways in these different places. And it just so happens that, a monochronic structure is generally going to be more efficient, and it's going to lead to a more productive population, more productive society, a society that, where did I have this? A society that, say, takes over the entire world. And, by the way, I'm not even necessarily apologizing for colonialism. I'm just, saying why it happened. Okay? And look, and I mean, you can just sort of see this, like, it's plain as day that, whites and Asians are significantly more productive than other peoples. And you can blame colonialism all day. Colonialism has been gone for decades, and Africa has only degraded. Okay? South Africa used to be a first world country under minority white rule. Not anymore. And, it's the whole thing. Like, I won't say that people weren't harmed by colonialism. But I mean, Europeans didn't just take, they gave a lot back. They built infrastructure, they built schools, they built hospitals. Okay, but they left, and these things, they just weren't maintained. And, we've given so much money in aid to Africa, and, it still hasn't made a difference. If anything, it's just made it worse. So anyways, though, and look, I'll give you a few examples, okay? Because this is something that I think it's really important to understand, okay? So here's the royal palaces of Dahomey. Okay, these were made for the kingdom of Dahomey, which was a very wealthy African kingdom back in the day. They got wealthy off the slave trade, okay? And this is their opulent palace, okay? This is the pinnacle of Dahomey's culture, okay? Yeah. All right. And look, it's nice. Like, compare this to, say, I don't know, the Palace of Versailles. And look, you might say this isn't a fair comparison. Okay. But even let's just look at the castle of Vaduz, the Vaduz castle. Okay, this is the residence of the Prince of Liechtenstein, which is one of the smallest countries in Europe. All right. And look, it might not be that fancy, but I mean, well, I think it was made more, well, if it's a castle, it's not a palace, so it's not supposed to be as fancy, but it's like an actual building, Like, this is a pretty impressive piece of architecture, and it's also almost 1,000 years old. All right, and this goes even further. Like, you see sort of this phenomenon a lot. Like, the richest man to have ever lived is believed to be Mansa Musa, the 14th century emperor of the Mali Empire. His fortune derived from the Mali Empire's control of vast amounts of gold and salt. It's estimated to be equivalent to modern-day wealth in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And, I don't really know if Mansa Musa was that rich. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if... I mean, he very well might have been that rich. But you want to know what he did with that wealth? He built this. Okay? He built this mosque. All right, in 1327. Yeah, really putting all that money to good use. And, just compare that to basically any European church. I mean, this is the This is Notre Dame, of course. But I mean, look, you can look up any one, and it's going to be significantly nicer. Hell, this one's freaking older. Notre Dame is somehow older, and it's still nicer. But, yeah. But look, my point here is that ultimately, this is all a result of sort of cultural differences. And I think a big part of it is monochromatic versus polychromatic. All right? Because Mansa Musa might have been super rich, but he was in a society, he was of a people that didn't really think long term. All right? So if you're not thinking long term, if you're not thinking long term, then you're not going to make investments. You're not going to start making long term investments, You're going to say, so you're not going to end up building an actual civilization because civilization requires long term investments. You get what I'm saying? And look, these kinds of people, like leftists, non-whites, they absolutely, a lot of them, the most extreme ones, hate this kind of thing, because it literally is completely counter to their instincts. And in a sense, it plays into their sort of, their inferiority complex, because they know in their souls that the reason why their countries are so shitty is because they don't practice these kinds of things. They don't practice the kind of structures that would actually build a healthy society. And it's like that in Africa, it's like that in India, Southeast Asia, wherever. And I'm not even necessarily saying it's a bad thing. I don't think the entire world should even strive to be like Europe or like Japan or whatever. But I'm just calling it like I see it. And, this creates problems when, say, we import people from these countries who are fundamentally different culturally, fundamentally have a different way of, say, doing things. It just creates problems, But anyways, though, that was a tangent. This video is getting long. But anyways, how can we decolonize cozy games? Also, this is kind of ironic, but because it's not like because they're saying this, whatever, but we can start the process of decolonizing and practicing whatever, by questioning ourselves and those we trust around us. For example, what does safety mean for the audience we are trying to... What? What does safety mean for the... It's a video game. What do you mean safety? You're gonna get hit by a screenshot? What mechanics, rewards, cultural touchstones, and character archetypes will we implement that will resonate with them? Okay, so... could you even really have a cozy game that doesn't have, like, a calendar system? The whole thing, like, if we're talking Harvest Moonlights, you kind of need a calendar system. Oh, whatever. I mean, what is the relationship of the player character to the NPC community, and how can we handle this mechanically and narratively? I don't know how this is problematic. I mean, normally, the whole point of a lot of these kinds of games is just to become a part of the community. How many generations of people are present? I have no idea how this is problematic. I wish we could see this, because do they have like an issue with there being like kids and adults and like elderly people like all existing in the same area? How would that ever be some kind of problem? Like I said, I haven't played tons of cozy games, but they normally have people of all ages. And then how is time measured, and how does this play out mechanically and narratively? This is the thing that's insane. How they literally just have an issue. But I mean, we already talked about this. They literally have an issue with time itself. Okay? Because the way Europeans think about it, the way even East Asians think about it, is just the most efficient way to think about it, and they just completely reject it. And that's why they're all unproductive. That's why their societies all suck. All right? And they blame us. Okay? They blame us. Okay? They blame the... Man. They blame the Europeans particularly, because that's where they are. But I mean, I guarantee you, in like 20 years when Japan gets fucked by all this immigration, hopefully that doesn't happen, but if it does, okay, we're gonna have a sweet baby ink in Japan making these same kinds of fucking presentations. And then this is interesting. Games to check out: Fields of Mystria, Saltsea Chronicles, and Mutazione. Tales of the Shire, Wanderstop. And by the way, Fields of Mystria, I saw this and I'm like, okay, Iranian anime girl, how bad could it be? Alright. I mean, look, come on. But first of all, the pixel art's a dead giveaway. Okay, second, look at this character art. Holy shit. Get back to your Tumblr page, girl. Oh my god, that's a rough one. Fuck. Anyways, though. And then Tales of the Shire. When I first saw this game, I thought it was so... yeah, this is so stupid, man. But yeah, this is another woke game made by Sweet Baby Inc. 2 and also Black Hobbits for some reason. Excuse me? You know, isn't Middle-earth supposed to be in Europe? I know it's fantasy technically, but I'm pretty sure the setting's supposed to be European. But anyways, though, this is just kind of ridiculous. Did I have anything else I wanted to talk about here? I don't think so. Yeah, but anyways, though, that's about it. Anyways, though, most people are going to see this and just say crazy leftists. But I definitely think there's a lot more to it. Like I said, I explained it. I really just do think this comes from, you know, non-white people, you know, non-white, non-East Asian, you know, inferiority complexes, you know? You know, they hate the way, you know, we, you know, let's see, let's find it. You know, they hate the way we do things, okay? Because they come from these shithole countries, which are shitholes because they don't manage them properly. They aren't productive. That's just the way their culture is. And I'm not saying it's a bad look, and I'm just saying it is what it is. Okay? But Africa sucks. India sucks. South America sucks. And if you disagree, go live there. Okay? I swear. Live in Colombia for 3 months in just a normal area. All right? Live in the Democratic Republic of the Congo for 3 months in a normal area. Live in Pakistan for 3 months in a normal area. You know, an average area. All right? And we'll see how much you like it. And look, the reason why these countries are the way they are is just because of their culture. The way, literally, something as fundamental as the way they just do things. Okay? The way they think about performing tasks. You know? The blue thinks more long-term, all right? And then the red thinks more short-term. The blue is more focused. The red isn't very focused, all right? That's just simply what it is, okay? Cultural differences, and then they come here, they don't perform that well, and then they develop this big inferiority complex, and then they just start hating us, all right? But anyways, I'm rambling now. Comment down below what you guys think. Like the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe for more content in the future. Thank you guys all for watching, and goodbye.